Okay, welcome to another class of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, Teachers Certification Course, Training Certification Course. You may be seated. You might be seated there if you're standing up. Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to having all of you here and all of the people who've been attending on the internet, all the classes. These classes run in succession. We started with the character unit and we move on, and each unit builds upon the last unit that we studied, and each chapter builds upon the last chapter and the last unit. So we are in the acceptance manual right now, and we also bring with us, if you have one available, the character unit, because we revert back to that unit many times, which we will tonight also. Again, if you've been following the classes, you know that recently we've had Chris Heiler, we've had Catan Alexander and William Krause all teaching, and I think coming up would probably be the teacher Chris Heiler on, just to give you a heads up here, the next class will be on, let's see, Sunday the 15th, 8/15/21. That'll be the next class at 5:30, so make sure you have plans to attend. We look forward to all of you being here. Okay, so to get started tonight, we left off, exactly what page it is, page 39 in the acceptance manual, page 39, and we were going over what we have learned in that last chapter, which is about diversity, learning how to be tolerant instead of intolerant. But the title is actually of chapter 2 is actually Accepting Diversity. Now, it did talk a lot about different types of diversity and different types of intolerance. We went into accepting people of different nationalities, different colors, different, just different places they were born. Might have been born in California and this person born in Texas, you know, plenty of differences in people, in accepting different cultures, accepting other physical differences like handicaps and so forth. So we've talked about all of these things, and just to give it a brief overview here, see, last week we talked about, look at on page 39, look at the top of 39, and number 1, we are all unique human beings with the same desire to be needed, appreciated, and respected. And I had a note here, when someone abuses that trust and honor, you know, it's hard to get past that. Now, that can be done by anybody. It doesn't matter, you know, what color you are, what nationality you are, or whatever. You can have two people of the same color, two people of the same nationality, two people, you know, with the same physical differences or physical attributes like that. And there could be someone that abuses that trust, that doesn't focus on and respect and appreciate the other human being that they're dealing with. So we are all unique. There's not another one like us anywhere, and we do have that desire to be appreciated and respected. Last week I showed a little card here you could kind of possibly remember that what helps you when you're dealing with someone else and thinking about them is to put them in your shoes, if you will. This would be how you think of yourself in a situation. You might think of yourself as the victim, or the one that's unfairly treated, or the one that's thankful, or being compassionate and respectful and humble and tolerant and so forth, while thinking of the other person in quite a different way. Let's think of the other person like we think of ourselves right there too, and that will help us in our ability to appreciate and respect the other person and deal with them in a proper manner. Now, Let's see, look at number 2. When all people of all nationalities, ethnicities, and languages begin accepting the differences of others, there will be no more excuses for intolerance. If we could turn to page 23 in your acceptance manual. And look down towards the bottom. Let's see, pretty much the last paragraph. During the course of history, wars have been fought because of a lack of acceptance of people who are physically different. What causes people to mistreat and hate one another because of their physical and ethnic differences? What causes that? Well, there's a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about a little bit of it. But can we learn, and by the way, this carries on into the next chapter also. Can we learn to coexist and respect each other, or will our differences continue to cause conflicts, hatred, and war? And in this chapter, we will explore these questions and more. You will learn that accepting others, looking past what makes us different, and focusing on our similarities will lead us to a place called appreciation and respect. And that helps us to deal positively with one another. Let's go ahead and turn to page 25. And let's just look at the middle of the page there. There's a notation there. It's talking about intolerance, and, of course, the opposite of acceptance takes on many forms, the stereotyping, prejudice, and so forth. But let's drop down to the middle. In bold, it says, basic fundamental respect for all people means to, number 1, avoid violent verbal or physical behavior, and number 2, to interact with consideration of others' needs by showing compassion. Now, again, the card I showed you a moment ago, if you're thinking about the other person as you're thinking of yourself, you will be thinking of their needs. You will show compassion. You will show respect. Remember, let's really think about the other person and treat them the way that we want to be treated. It's hard to do sometimes, and as we go into the next chapter talking about communication, some things will become very clear there too on how you must do this to communicate positively with another person. It's a must. You've just got to. Otherwise, the communication will not be there. And you got to know what communication is. We're going to get there in a moment. Just hang in there. Page 31, briefly. Again, we're talking about the point number 2 on page 39, what I've learned. On page 31, acceptance means acknowledging the many similarities, this is down towards the bottom, that exist between each member of the human race, and embracing these differences by consciously making an effort to become more respectful towards people of other cultures and nationalities. Now remember, this focuses a lot on the intolerance that we see in today's, all around us today, talking about the differences in people's skin color and so forth, and nationality and so forth, or even different political affiliations. And so consciously making an effort to become more respectful is a very important thing in everything that we do. Consciously doing that, putting forth some effort. You got to put forth the effort. It also means appreciating the various nationalities and ethnicities, and instead of finding reasons to alienate one another, let's focus on all the similarities that we share. And for your notes, page 32. So there's a few things we're looking at in talking about this point number 2. Now, what really matters? Now, William had gone over this lesson. I think Catan reverted back to it also. But the human race can be compared to the apples in this particular activity on page 32. We might have different physical characteristics, but inside we are all the same. And rather than focusing on one another's differences, in this case, black, white, rich, poor, skinny, fat, etc., let's focus on our similarities. After all, we are all human. We all want to be loved and needed. Now, there we go again, going back to that thing of, everyone has the same desires to some degree. When you're dealing with another person, remember that they too have the same needs and desires that you need. They have the need to be loved. They have the need to be respected. They have the need to be accepted. And when we can do that, we are well on the way of having peace in everything that we do. But after all, we are all human. We all want to be loved and needed. We want to fit in. We want to be accepted. And we all have the potential to learn the value of a positive moral character. In fact, that need to fit in is so strong that I remember there was some kind of survey done at a university of the new students coming in to the school, and they said the number one thing that they wanted more than anything else was to fit in. It didn't seem that the number one thing was to get educated, or the number one thing was to have a great moral character and to treat people right. Their number one thing was to fit in. So don't ever think that that's not a strong pull. And that falls into the influences and so forth that we'll be talking about also. Let's look at point number 3 on page 39. I can begin making a difference now by learning how to build rapport with others. Okay, well, back on page 35, that whole page is talking about, really kind of talking about building rapport with others. It goes into what a diplomat does and how they prepare to deal with people from other nations that come here, or actually all nations have diplomats that deal with other diplomats and other people from other places. But just to look at this, if you look at the middle of the page, actually from about the middle to the bottom, the bold print where it says, here are a few ways in which you can practice your skills in diplomatic relations. Be determined not to make derogatory remarks or put others down for any reason. That takes conscious effort also. It takes, we're going to talk about this too, but people's, the influences that we're exposed to every day, our reputations, the reputations of others. But remember the apple activity we talked about a moment ago, and avoid accepting negative concepts about others based only on their physical characteristics or places of birth. Choose your words carefully when speaking to others and communicate respectfully. Learn about some of their customs so you don't offend them, and this goes into the diplomacy also. Make them feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. We don't want to do that. By practicing these simple rules, you'll gain many friends even in a world full of hate. So a person that's doing that and trying to build that rapport really they have to work on it. They have to put forth conscious effort. I remember one of the things that we did in going out and meeting dignitaries all over, throughout the states and in Washington and so forth. One of the things we tried to do was find something about that person. We knew we were going to meet them, and find out something about that person that we could really appreciate. As an example, I remember Chuck Grassley. Before we went and met with him, we had a brief bio of him that was available online in his congressional office and or website, and some personal things about him and so forth. And one of the things that stood out to me, which I found really amazing, and I couldn't stop talking about it when I got there to see them, was he visits every district in his state every year. Every district, every year. And he has for the many years that he's been in Congress. Now that's amazing to me. I've never read of anybody else doing that. It would mean that he's on the move, something like, I can't remember exactly how many districts are there. I meant to look it up tonight, but it's a lot, and he's on the move like almost every day, going to the different districts, visiting, seeing what's going on, really putting forth some effort. To me, that was amazing, and that, we hit it off with them right away in his office, because we had something in common in that we agreed upon that, I guess, is the best way to put it. It built rapport. But we took the effort to find out something about them. Okay, and looking on down, building rapport, your teacher informs you that there's a foreign exchange student who will be joining your class, and you've been assigned as the class diplomat. The foreign exchange student does not speak your language well and is unfamiliar with the customs and practices of your nation. So your job is to help this new student feel comfortable and accepted in this new environment. You've got one day to prepare for his or her arrival to your class, and it gives a little activity there that you can do on the things that you might do to prepare for it, which would be a great activity for you to do, to think about it a little bit. Whether you write it down or not, think about it. Actually, what would you do to prepare? How would you build rapport? How would you try to make that person feel comfortable? All right, so let's go back to page 39. Now, page 39 on the fourth point says, taking the time to learn about different cultures and respecting the differences will lead to positive moral interaction. And in this interaction, when we're not judging others, remember the card, putting yourself in their shoes and letting them be in your shoes a little bit in this respect, not putting others down. And when we accept our differences and look towards our similarities, will lead us to a place called appreciation and respect and peace. And that basically is kind of what we just went over on page 35. Now look at point 5. Even when others show intolerance towards me, I'm determined to be respectful and maintain a forgiving attitude. Now, last week we talked about that a little bit, and from that point, we went back up to number 1. I have an arrow drawn there, as a matter of fact. We are all unique human beings with the same desire to be needed, appreciated, and respected. And when we can remember that, then we can remember that even when others show intolerance towards us, we can be determined to be respectful and maintain a forgiving attitude. And we talked about that forgiving. We talked about that forgiving also on page 37, and how to focus on others and remember they have the same needs as we do, and to remain unselfish, empathetic, compassionate, and respectful. And then, of course, on page 39, looking at the bullet point or the word box there, one of the most important ways to reduce intolerance is to regard others with the same care and compassion as you regard yourself. I know I've already said that many times even tonight, but that's the key. It really, really is the key. We want to find out about people. We want to find out what they like. We want to build rapport and focus on our interaction on them instead of ourselves. Keep that in mind as we go further. Now, I know those that were following on the internet last week, we had a few technical difficulties, and there was a page out of the character unit that I wanted to show, and I've got it here tonight actually. So taking a look at that, there's a young man behind the brick wall, and this is entitled, Now That We Have It, How Do We Keep It? Well, you can see this right here. That's labeled influences. I'll zoom in just a little bit there. See where it's influences coming at him? But he's got a wall built up to protect himself against those negative influences. And the way he's protecting himself is through being respectful, honest, courageous, generous, patient, having humility, having compassion, being trustworthy, and also being forgiving. And by having these positive character traits built up inside you and really like building a wall around you to protect yourself from all these negative influences coming your way, that's the way to do it. That's the way to have a forgiving attitude. That's the way that we can treat others the same way that we treat ourselves, or the way that we want to be treated. Okay? Now, what I'd like to do is, there's a few activities there you can look at and do for yourself, but let's go ahead and turn to Lesson Plan 3, page A. Lesson Plan 3, page A. And just reminding you that while you're turning there, for those of you that do have a book, reminding you that this is something that we have to work on every day. It's we have to practice this acceptance with all people. And one of the things that we can do is not really make generalizations about people, like, oh, yeah, they're from over there in that country. Those people are all that way, you know? That's not true. That's not true of any person from any country. All people from one country are not the same way as the others, you know? That is absolutely not true. So you can't generalize in that way. Individuals, everybody's an individual. Different people have different characters, different people have different personalities, and all people have, you know, some weaknesses and some strengths, you know, and we want to look at the strengths and the things that we can agree with and accept. So, you know, so regardless of all these things and all these differences, remembering, you know, that everybody wants the same thing deep down inside. They all need to be accepted and respected and so forth, which we talked enough about that, I think, already. So we're going to move on here to Lesson Plan 3, page A. And Chapter 3 says, positive communication leads to healthy interactions. Well, remember when I said this carries over into Chapter 3? Well, it can't help but carry over. Because once again, with the peaceful solution, everything builds upon everything else that you've already learned. That's why you can't just leave it on the shelf. You know, we've been through the character unit. What do? Just put it on the shelf and forget about it? No, that's not what we do. We revert back to it all the time. And as you go through the peaceful solution and you get these books lined up on your shelf, you know, well, don't just leave them up there. Let's use them, you know. I know many of us have been through several books. We've worn them out. We've written in them so much we've kind of lost track where we were at and had to start over again and make a few more organized notes and added notes and everything from notes that we've taken in class. So this is a note to the teacher. That's you, the teacher. All of us that are training to be teachers of the peaceful solution. So this is for you. We're transitioning from the last class, and so the ability to accept others of diverse cultures and beliefs is incomplete if we are unable to communicate with them in a way that is positive and effective. Now there we are, we're focusing again on the diverse cultures and different beliefs, but again, the last chapter covered like everybody. If you were considered fat or skinny or, you know, had some kind of handicap in some way, or you went to this school or that school. You know, there were so many different things that made up that diversity. So who are we talking to here in this? We're talking to everybody. So again, our ability to accept others and to talk to others is incomplete if we're unable to communicate with them in a way that is positive and effective. In fact, positive communication that is respectful, moral, and considerate demonstrates an attitude of acceptance for all people regardless of their diversity. And this applies once again to all people. So get that, an attitude of acceptance for all people. Okay, that's what positive communication will help you achieve. And what is an attitude? It says to demonstrate an attitude of acceptance for all people. Well, an attitude is something that you carry with you. Right now in this room, if we went around and did a survey of what you thought about different things, it would be based upon your attitude. You could have an attitude of caring, or you could have an attitude of non-caring. You know, it goes back to everything we've been learning. You can have an attitude of being respectful or disrespectful. It is attitude, and you know, something that that we used to really push a lot in sales was that attitude is everything. Well, it really is to some degree, because you can have an attitude of wanting a great moral character and holding on to that, or you can have an attitude of, well, I don't really care. It's, you know, yeah, it sounds interesting. I think I'd like to learn it a little bit, you know, but so it can be adjusted. That's the great news. Our attitudes can be adjusted. That's what's great about it. So poor communication, on the other hand, not only results in misunderstandings and hurt feelings, but also demonstrates an attitude of intolerance. Negative words, tone of voice, and body language can belittle someone's worth. So we're going to learn more about that as this chapter goes on too. But I want you to think about something. As we move on further, we find that words, you'll find that words don't have as much of an impact on what a person perceives being said as much as the body language and tone of voice and attitude. It's funny how people can pick out that attitude that you have from the tone of voice you're using, the body language that you're exhibiting, and of course the words you're saying also. The facial features that you exhibit. I can't help but lead into a little bit of it. I'll try to practice some self-control and refrain. But so negative words, tone of voice, body language can belittle someone's worth and lead to interaction that's not conducive to positive moral growth and development. When we consider how our relationships, both personal and professional, are affected by the way we communicate, we can clearly see the value in teaching children how to effectively convey their needs and feelings. And I might add, not only children, but adults too. And no matter how old you are as an adult, your attitude can be changed. It can be adjusted. So let's talk about communication just for a moment. Now, I looked up the word communication. And as you might expect, it first came up with the art of communicating or something, you know, along those lines, which, again, leads back to a pretty common thing. But so we got to find out, and I got now another definition, which is a little more concise. A process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behavior. And then it goes on, exchange of information, and a personal aspect, rapport, and so forth. I've got more. To cause to pass from one to another, so you're communicating something. Notice it gives the example of some diseases are communicated too. But what we want to communicate is what we're trying to get across. When we're communicating, we want to have active listening and active communication. We want to be able to share and gain, so we can really see what's going on with the other person. So we can show that we care. You know, another thing that was said many times in sales was, you know, they'll never care how much you know until they know how much you care. They'll never care how much you know until they know how much you care. Okay? So looking back up here again, to transmit information, thought, or feeling so that it's satisfactorily received or understood. Now that's a great definition of it. We want to transmit this information or thought in a way that it can be received and understood. And we want to be open to one another. We want to connect. You know, we want to get that connection so that we know that we're understanding what's going on with the other person and they understand what's going on with us. And we understand their feelings, their desires, their wants and needs. And so communicate itself, let's look at the overhead again, please. So the definition of communicate itself is to convey knowledge of or information about, to make known, to reveal by clear signs, to cause to pass from one to another, and then, of course, a more archaic thing is to share. But all of those things apply, and there's nothing wrong with that meaning there too, to share, because that's exactly what it is. Now, we've got to remember what I showed you from the character unit there, the picture of the young man behind the wall guarding against the influences. Because the effect of influences upon communication is actually very big. I mean, it's massive. In fact, just to go back for a moment, page 60 in the character unit. Page 60 in the character unit, it says influences are all around us. Your values play such a key role in developing your character that you got to be aware how influences affects the things that are important to us. And of course, this is going to be important to us, communicating with other people. And remember, an influence is something or someone that has the ability to affect your attitude, your way of thinking, your feeling and behaving, thoughts, feelings, and actions. On down on that page, about halfway down, it says how you are influenced can affect what you value or motivate you to create new values. Now get that, because that's pretty strong. So how your influence can affect what you value or motivate you to create new values. Now how does that play out when you're trying to communicate with somebody? When you're trying to show others that you accept them, even in whatever type of diversity we're dealing with. How does that come into play? Well, right there. Those influences can affect what you value and motivate you to change your values, whether positive or negative. So we have to keep that in mind. And influences come in all different sizes. Look at the bottom. This is so important to remember. They can be positive or negative, subtle or bold. But one thing they have in common is that they have the ability to affect us, to affect what we value, to affect our character in a positive or negative way, to affect how we're going to deal with that individual, to affect us on if we're going to be able to look at that person and understand that they have the same needs, wants, and desires as we do on being accepted, respected, cared for, and so forth. We've got to remember that. And so, what attitude? Did you see that up there at the top when it first described the influence as something that has the ability to affect your attitude? So what attitude do we have when we're beginning to deal with another party? That's so important for us to remember. We've got to, it's another one of these sales sayings, but some of them make sense, Take a checkup from the neck up before you take an up. Meaning before you go out there and talk to that person, take a checkup from the neck up and make sure you have the right attitude as you go out and talk to that individual. Yes, it applies in everything we do in life. It applies in every form of communication. It applies in sales. It applies in dealing with our families. It applies in dealing with coworkers. It applies with dealing with somebody we just met. It applies with dealing with diplomats and dignitaries and peoples of all nations, all colors, everything. It applies everywhere. So yeah, we get these little sayings sometimes that kind of help trigger it a little bit, So we got to keep in mind these variables that come into play when we're communicating. Another thing, so we've talked about the influences there. Again, we're on lesson plan 3, page A, and we'll get back to it in just a moment, the note to the teacher. But this is for you, the teacher, to know and remember all these things when you're dealing with your students, when you're teaching a class, when you're trying to share the information, when you're trying to connect with the student, when you're trying to get it across to where it's understandable. We all have successes and failures in those areas. And so we can keep trying and trying to have more successes than failures. But we have to keep in mind these things. Let's again, if you have the character unit with you, it's such a valuable thing to have. And I think we were told at the beginning it would be very important for you to have it if you possibly could, if you did have one. And also knowing you can go on the internet and download that onto your phone or on your computer. You can download the books. But on the character unit on page 90, so here's another thing that's so extremely important, our reputations. What about the reputation that you have, or what about the reputation that the other individual has before you have an interaction? So, talking about your reputation. Now, at the top of the page, it says your reputation is developed over time, and it's the overall quality or character as seen or judged by people in general. Again, a lot of people mistake character for personality, and, things get a little confusing in there. And that's another thing you got to think about, too, the personalities. Look at all these things that come into play that are hammering us before we're even stepping in front of the person we're fixing to communicate with, no matter what type of diverse person they are. Keeping in mind, once a bad reputation is established, that's dropping down a little bit, it's difficult to undo what others think of you. So, of course, we have to guard our reputation, but once again, keeping in mind the other person's needs and desires and the desire to be accepted and so forth, what about their reputation? What if we've heard something bad about them? Well, let's talk about it a minute. Drop on down to the middle. Do you know anyone with a bad reputation? Think about it a minute. Do you? Do you know someone with a bad reputation? Well, that reputation was developed by some action others saw or heard about that person at one time or another. Get this next point. Whether it was true or not. A reputation can be formed whether true or not. So now, how does that affect our ability to communicate with an individual? Think about it a moment, because I think we've all had times that, we did have a preconceived notion about an individual before we spoke with them. And I'm throwing everybody in there. Diversity is everything. Yes, we just covered a lesson that focused more on different colors and nationalities more than anything else, but it also delved into all types of diversity. Remember, the handicaps, the different areas of the state that you used to live, or different schools that you went to, or you were fat or skinny or short or tall, or all these things come into play. So once again, how does this affect you and the ability to communicate properly with the individual you're going to see, or that has sat down next to you, or that you sat down next to, or that you were assigned to be somewhat of a diplomat and find out what that person needed? Please think about that. These are all the things that come into play that can affect our ability to communicate. And remember, the title of chapter 3 is Positive Communication Leads to Healthy Interactions. So we got to do a checkup from the neck up before we have that interaction, that communication. Because we want healthy interactions. We want to have friends. I know the author of The Peaceful Solution, Yusra Hawkins, he said one time, not only to me, but to others, to a group, he said, you've got to have friends. When times get tough, you've got to have friends. So we should be striving to have friends. And what better way to start than those around us, our coworkers, the people we see every day, our families. What better place to start to have friends than those that are around us everywhere? So now, that being said, keeping in mind all these things that affect our positive communication and our healthy interactions, the influences we get hammered with every day, so we really want to control what influences come our way. Let's block out those negatives, right? If someone comes to you with negativity, you might just mention to them, hey, I'm really trying to remain positive. Or ask them, hey, what positive thing can you remember about today? Or, hey, I know that person too, and I remember, man, he jumped in to help me one time when nobody else would. Let's speak positive things. Keeping in mind the reputation of ourselves, maybe the person we're fixing to have interaction has heard some bad things about us. Maybe they've heard great things. You'll probably know pretty soon which way that is. But again, we don't want to have the focus on ourselves. Don't be thinking so much about, well, what does this person think about me? Be thinking about what you think about him or her, whatever the case might be. If you start focusing on yourself too much, it's probably not going to go the right way. All right, so our thoughts. Well, let's move on down page 90 of the character unit here for a minute. So as you know, this is down towards the bottom. It says, as you know, word gets around whether it's positive or negative, and your reputation's no different. In fact, you might all know about someone, though it might be true or not, without ever meeting them because their reputation precedes them, just as yours precedes you. People are observing you at all times. And I want to say, as a teacher of the Peaceful Solution, you need to be aware that your students are watching you all the time. They're looking at you with a microscope. They might come to you at some point in time and say, I had the opportunity, I think the last class, I said something right at the very end that if anybody saw me doing something that was not according to the lesson we just went over, in any degree, please let it be known. Feel free to come up and say, hey, David, can I talk to you a minute? Well, guess what occurred? I had that opportunity. I got a phone call, and, I had the opportunity to be thinking of myself as the victim for a minute, and to be thinking about how I did things right and this other person was doing something differently than what I would have done. And the person on the other end of the phone said, you know what, David? I saw the lesson last week. It was really great. And boom, there it goes. My head just blew up right there on the spot. I was like, thank you for pointing that out. It hit home. So we've got to... And I'm trying to use that as an example to show you how quickly it can come back. And believe me, we all are going to be doing that. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to fail sometimes at it, But having the ability to jump back and get in there and correct the situation is what we need to be working towards. Who knows? Possibly later in the week, I've done it many times, and maybe someone didn't come and tell me. I don't know, but I try to look back and see. So we have to remember also our thoughts. These are some of the things that are coming our way that affect our positive communication and our healthy interactions. And you as the teacher should know about, be able to learn about, and be able to convey this information, because you have to have positive communication with your students to have that healthy interaction. So these are the things you need to know about when teaching a class. You've got to keep in mind your reputation. What are you doing? What are your students seeing you do? What are they talking about, Be aware of what you're doing. You can't change you can't change them, And to go about to each one of them trying to change what they think about you is probably going to be futile. So the best thing you can do is be the best example that you can be, because your reputation, the thoughts, their reputation, the thoughts you have about your students, the thoughts your students have about you, these are things that all come into play on whether you're going to have this positive communication or not. Now, I want you to think about the personalities also. Well, let's go back to thoughts for just a minute. On page 80 of the character unit, you've got to set your mind in advance. We're always talking about setting our mind in advance and being prepared for what might come our way, right? So part of that is watching our thoughts. And so on page 80, when talking about watching your thoughts, it says a very critical aspect of maintaining your positive character is being aware of your thoughts. These thoughts continuously run through our minds, and they're significant in controlling our actions and our decisions. A particular thing to be aware of is the negative thoughts that might enter our mind when we feel someone has wronged us. And it goes back again to, if someone's ever hurt us, or we perceive that they hurt us, perceived disrespect, it could be imagination even. But that's why we have to be able to put ourselves in their shoes and think, hey, they might have had a bad day. I know they want the same ability to be accepted. They want the same respect. They want a great reputation also. And so we have to think about that. But keep in mind these thoughts that come our way. They can have an effect on us as we're teaching our students and in our daily life, in our interactions. And then personalities. On page 23 in the character unit, I told you we'd be going back to the character unit some, so don't be surprised. And I have heard the other teachers also mention that it'd be a great idea to have your character unit, because we will be reverting back to that on a consistent basis. And as we move on to the next units, we'll be dropping back to along the way, because the character unit is the foundation of all this. We've got to get that down. We've got to get it in our heads. Turn to page 23 of the character unit if you have it available. Now, this starts out by saying, what is personality? And I'll go ahead and read that first little bit. It says, because it's so easy to confuse personality and character, it's important to explore what's meant by personality. Now, the personality is made up of behavioral traits that are unique to each individual. Personality is the process you choose in how you govern your feelings, attitudes, and preferences. Now, isn't that interesting? Personality is the process that you choose, so you have a choice in the matter here, on how you govern your feelings, your attitudes, and preferences. And I don't have it with me tonight, but some of you might have seen something from our workplace manual, Moral Excellence in the Workplace. But you might have seen the picture in there that shows the basic little house. It's got a frame and everything, and this is your character. It's a well-built house and all that. And then in the next picture next to it, it has like flowers outside and shutters on the windows and a fancy roof and a landscaped yard and so forth. And that's kind of the idea of personality, on top of character, on how you want to present yourself, if you will. I don't know if I explained that properly. If I had the picture, it'd probably do better, but so it's the process which you choose in how you govern your feelings, attitudes, and preferences, and it's the basis by which you choose to interact with others. Wow. For example, when you first meet someone, you notice if they smile when they say hello. Not everybody does. Not everybody's walking around with a smile all day on their face. Again, not everybody's walking around with a frown all day on their face either. A lot of times it's a combination of the two. Sometimes when people are in deep thought, you might catch them and they got a frown on your face. It doesn't mean they're frowning at you, They might just be in thought or having something they're needing to deal with, so they might not be so joyful at that moment. You might also notice if they're humorous, serious, outgoing, or shy in general as their general personality. If you look on down, the beginning of the last, or next to last paragraph, I should say, there's a sentence there that we should be aware of. It says, most people choose their friends based upon compatible personalities. Now get that. Most people. Now, we as teachers and students of the Peaceful Solution are learning that we should be choosing our friends based upon their character. The personality might be the initial thing that we see, the initial thing that stands out on us thinking, oh, that person has the same type of car that I do, or that person has, I see they have a book that I read not too long ago, or you see something kind of like a little bit in common that you think, oh, I could talk to this person. At that point, you know nothing about their character. At that point, you might not know anything about their reputation. You might not have any negative or positive thoughts, whatever, about the individual. You might have just seen them, But that personality is something that shows up at the beginning of when we first meet somebody. Now, going back to Lesson Plan 3, page A, where positive communication leads to healthy interactions, it says in this lesson, students will learn what communication is. We're on our way to learning that right now. We've got a lot more to go. What it is and its importance in building quality relationships, being able to communicate. And students will understand that by accepting others, remember we just got through talking about accepting diversity in the last chapter, but by accepting others, we're more likely to communicate and interact with them in a more peaceful, considerate, and effective way. Now, some of you might have heard me kind of chuckle a moment ago. I was thinking about something while I was preparing the lesson. It came to mind that I've seen different people out there. Like right now, I'm looking out here in the audience, and I see quite a few people. I see most of you are dressed what I would say is very moderate, which we do teach in the Peaceful Solution, by the way. Is trying not to offend people by having possibly a more moderate dress than the wilder things. But I thought about, what if I was assigned to go talk to somebody, and as I got closer to them, I realized that it was that person over there with their hair sticking straight up, and it was pink, and they had, piercings all over them and everything, and I personally would have a bit of I would have to adjust my attitude. I would have to definitely take a checkup from the neck up and make sure my attitude was right before I talked to this individual, and knowing that even though I would not do that, and there probably would be a few character issues involved in there somewhere too, but knowing that my job was to speak with them and find out what their needs and desires and wants were, and how we could possibly help, and how we could learn to get along. I thought to myself that thing. The picture came to mind, and that's kind of a wild example, but guess what? It might not be that wild after all, because we have had many classes where there were people that differed quite a bit from us, quite a bit of diversity there in the way a person looked, whether they were fat, skinny, what color they were, what tall or short, or whatever the case might be. We've also had those that didn't dress or present themselves as moderately as we might have, but we still dealt with them. We didn't make fun of them. You can't do that. To get along with somebody and to have positive communication and to show the acceptance of others, You know, we got to think, okay, well, this person is a little bit different than me, but I wonder what positive qualities they have. I'm sure they've got some, you know. And so anyway, I wanted to just mention that too, is that sometimes you'll see some strange things, okay? Now, the last point on Lesson Plan 3, page A, is that students will learn to appreciate that positive communication leads to healthy interactions, which in turn promote a more harmonious and unified way of life. So keep in mind that that's a fact. I was hoping to get a little bit further, but we didn't quite get into the lesson plan much further. So the note to the teacher is what we just went over. You, the teacher in training, this is what you've got to learn and be able to convey to the student as we go on further. And I look forward to the rest of this chapter. If some of you have looked ahead, we've got some activities coming up where, you know, and I told you I'm trying to practice some self-control, but, you know, how you say it, not necessarily the words you say, means a lot. That's just a little tidbit. Keep it in mind. It's coming up probably in the next lesson or two. So it's something you could look forward to. Thank you very much. And keep in mind that, I'm sorry. So next Sunday on 8/15/2021, let's make sure I've got that date. 8/11/2021, the next class Wednesday. Let me try to get this straight one more time, okay? I believe I said the next class would be on Sunday, 8/15, and I need to correct that. And the next class is actually on Wednesday, 8/11/2021. So I think I've got that straight now. Is everybody there with that? Wednesday, 8/11/2021 at 5:30, okay? Then we'll have another class on Sunday, hopefully, after that. But the next class is on Wednesday, okay? Thank you very much for being here. All of you out there on the internet, and all of you that are here, all of you teachers in training in the Peaceful Solution Teacher Certification course. Thank you. Look forward